Hello, this is School Committee Update, today with Ward 4 member and Chair Andre Green. I'm Sarah Fishman. How are you doing, Andre?
Doing great. How are you?
Okay. So, I think we were talking before. You haven't been in this studio yet, have you?
I have not, no. This is my first time.
It's kind of cool.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah, they did a good job. And it's very nice to be talking to people in person.
It is.
Because you can have a conversation.
Yes.
Okay, so if we can start just with sort of a quick recap, your professional background, how long you've been on the school committee, your parent status.
Sure. So this is my 8th year on the school committee, which is hard to fathom. I've spent my career in, most of my career in anti-poverty, racial equity, social justice spaces. I currently work in philanthropy, particularly workforce development philanthropy. Although I've worked on family homelessness issues, youth development, education reform, arts and cultural policy, so pretty diverse background. And I am the proud father of a 9-year-old daughter.
Who goes to the Healy School.
She's in 3rd grade.
3rd grade. Okay, now you didn't mention this, but it is on your LinkedIn page, and I was told to even ask you to repeat your feat on Jeopardy.
Yes. Oh wow, it's almost 10 years ago now.
10 years ago?
Yeah. And because we don't live in a country with universal paid leave. It's how we were able to afford for my then wife to not work for a year when Maddie was born. I won Jeopardy.
That is so cool.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
That can't be easy.
Well, so like the dirty secret that they don't really tell you until you're there.
Yeah.
Well, there's 2 things. One, I can see fully that the initial test, the initial online test they do to screen applicants, hardest test I've ever taken. But the test was harder than actual being on the show. The trick to being on the show they don't show you is that off screen, lining the board, there are a row of lights. And the way it works is at the time Alex finishes reading the question, a human being off stage, one of the judges, hits a button that turns on this row of lights, and that's when your buzzers go live. And if you buzz in early, you're locked out for an 1/8 of a second, which doesn't sound like much, but it's enough to guarantee you won't be the first person to answer the question.
It's so hard, so you have to really time it carefully and watch the lights.
Yes.
Huh. Okay. So let's talk about something school related, I guess.
I mean, I'm glad to be talking about schools again and not public health after 3 years, so please.
Yeah. So the school budget is 10% higher than last year. So how did that come about?
Well, it came about, I think it's kind of I don't want to say a perfect storm, but so, coming back from COVID and the lockdown phase of COVID, it quickly became clear that kids needed extra supports. Emotionally, socially, academically, and in a organization where 80+% of the budget is personnel, the only way you get extra support is by extra personnel. So SEU, during their candidate endorsement process 2 years ago.
That's the union, right?
Yes. Yeah, Somerville Educators Union. I think asked all of the candidates for mayor if they would support a 10% increase in the budget. It quickly became clear to us on school committee that the 5%, which is the historical 5% we've gotten, which is generous comparatively to other cities and towns, and I always want to be clear that we have a very strong tradition here in Somerville of mayors and city council supporting a robust school budget, but wasn't up to the task. Probably still isn't up to the task of meeting the needs of kids. Some of which is because it wasn't like we were doing a great job of mental health supports before the pandemic.
But then they were stretched even more.
Right.
Yeah. I know a lot of kids who had trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My kid had relatively little trouble, but like, still,
Yeah.
I think for her, if it had gone on much longer, we'd have started seeing.
So does that mean that a lot of the increase is targeted to mental health or social services or some sort of wraparound service, or?
I would say a lot of last year's increase was,
Okay.
Supporting teachers, because coming back with, I would say last year was probably the hardest year teachers have ever had. Some of it went to doing things that were overdue, like giving paraprofessionals a living wage.
So that was that became $15,000, or was it 15?
It went up to starting at 35,000.
But it was 15 before.
It was 25 before.
Oh.
When I first joined the school committee, it started at like 19.
Yeah.
So yeah, almost doubled in my time on school committee. I think it's important work, and I'm glad we're finally recognizing it as such. But yeah, a lot of it, I would say, went to increased hired social workers, and increased mental health supports in the schools and districts, which again, while the pandemic exacerbated that need, it wasn't like we didn't need it before.
Right, right.
And I also want to, I want to thank the mayor and the city council for their leadership on the issue. It's also, we also have had the benefit for the last several years of an influx of federal money.
Like ARPA money or something?
Yeah, and for schools we call it ESSER.
Okay.
Yes, it's and you'll forgive me off the top of my head, I can't remember what that stands for.
Okay.
I think it's like an elementary and secondary school emergency relief. But don't hold me to that. But yeah, it's the same thing. And that money, and the challenge is that money, pending Congress authorizing an extension, goes away at the end of this year. And so now the challenge becomes, because the need hasn't gone away,
right,
is moving some of the positions that are on that money onto the general budget. Because the reality, I think, people need to wrestle with is that for students who went through this last couple of years, it's going to be with them their entire lives, and we won't be able to turn off the support for them like a spigot. So we've got to figure out how to make that sustainable.
Yeah. Well, good luck promoting that or supporting it or whatever the right term is, because it's definitely needed. So let's shift gears a little bit. Looking for a new school superintendent.
Yes.
So this is a very important thing.
The most important decision school committees make.
Yeah, yeah. So Mary Skipper left at the beginning of the school year. She overlapped a little, didn't she?
Yes.
She was both super for here and for Boston. I don't know how she did that.
I think for the first month of school year, Mary being Mary, I say she spent her time 80-80. I don't quite know how she didn't lose her mind, but it helps that in both places that there were strong teams. So we have our interim teams is top notch, and I think we are incredibly blessed this year that we're not just holding serve, we're actually moving the ball forward, which is not something a lot of districts can do during interim periods.
You said that at your midterm speech. What did you mean? Was there something specific you had in mind?
So we are tackling some of the academic challenges of coming back. We are beginning to work on building plans, because the reality is that we need to replace buildings that have reached in their life expectancy. We are making decisions around curriculum and how to structure systems for greater equity. We are working with our teachers on next generation PD. So so it's because we have good leadership. It's because we have a clear vision. So we're able to do more than just make sure that the buildings are open and
right, the fires are burning or
Right.
whatever. Yeah. Okay. So what is the timeline? Was there a meeting last night?
So the timeline for the superintendent search is
Yes.
The application period for candidates ended on January 8th. Last Saturday, our screening committee met for 4 hours to go. They'd all received their resumes on the 9th. We went through them. We picked out candidates.
How many people did you get?
So I can tell you that much. We got 27 applicants.
That's pretty good.
That's great, and they were all like. What I will tell you, like, is because we can't give you details until the finance are allowed announced, but I will tell people that, in my opinion, all 27 candidates could plausibly be a superintendent somewhere.
Well, that's nice to have that kind of
Yeah, the pool is phenomenal.
pool. Yeah.
And so we chose a number of them to do interviews that will start tomorrow. We'll be working all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And the hope is that Monday we'll be able to announce some finalists.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's pretty soon then.
We've an accelerated time frame.
How many finalists will there be?
It's too early to say.
Yeah.
At least 2. I think we're aiming for 3 to 5.
Okay.
Legally, we have to have at least 2 because public processes. We're hoping for 3 to 5, but it's too early to tell.
So is there any set of priorities or focus that you guys on the school committee have? Things that are really important for you
Sure.
to see in leaders?
Yeah, so we did I think a fairly robust public input process. And I think it was clear, staff, school committee, general public, there are some things I think were pretty clear. We want a strong and vocal equity champion. We want someone who immediately commands the respect of our educators, which probably, but doesn't definitely mean someone who's been a classroom teacher. We want someone who can connect with and work with and is eager to, and has shown a history of work with our immigrant communities. We want someone who shares our Somerville values around social justice and inclusion. And I think, we want someone who wants to do urban education, right? There are candidates, like for any high-profile leadership position, there are people who are applying because they want to be a superintendent. That's great. We want someone who wants to be a superintendent in an urban district and work with our challenges and with us on these things. Somerville has been blessed. The stat is the average tenure of an urban superintendent in a job is about 3 years. Over the last 30 years, we've averaged 1 every 9.
Yeah.
So, we'd like to continue that, right? Ideally, the superintendent we hire is a superintendent who gives my daughter her diploma when she enters high school. Is I think the hope.
Well, that's good. So there's a profile or a plan or whatever. So I know you guys did a lot of meetings, and there was listening sessions, and there was an online survey, and all that. That was all last year, understandably. But if folks want to say something now, is there public input that can be?
Certainly, they can give us generic public input. We are still finalizing the plan with the finalists, but I can say assuredly that each of the finalists will be made available for something like a virtual town hall or something, so people can ask questions, and then obviously either via email or coming to public comment, whatever. People will be more than happy to hear people's preferences.
So I didn't think of this before, but you guys was it the Massachusetts Association of School Committees? Were they helping guide you?
Yes, they're helping. They're consulting on this.
So I think at least sometimes in the past, there was a private contractor who was selected to help with the search. And I remember one time sitting in the West Somerville Neighborhood School about to give input, and these guys come in, and they're literally wearing cowboy boots. And not that you're not allowed to wear cowboy boots in Somerville, but they just exuded perhaps the opposite of the urban, perspective or interest or whatever.
I do think one of the reasons we ended up with MASC this time is and I probably should have said this, when we talked about profile of superintendent, one of the things that became clear early on in the search is that we are a unique place at a unique time. One of my colleagues, Emily Ackman, says that her number one thing is someone who gets Somerville. And I think, like, for us, the public input part of that is real, right? Like, Somerville residents expect and deserve a high level of input into processes. Even when those processes have to be confidential, like this one. And so, like, finding a search consultant who understood that, like, Somerville is going to be Somerville, and that was important.
So was going with a group like that, and that was Massachusetts-based, are you saying that that would make that more likely?
That's been our experience thus far.
Okay, so that's good.
Yeah, I've been very happy with MASC's support on this.
Good.
And I think they have done an excellent job of getting what we were looking for. Like we have one member who was here last time we did a search. So, like, we all had strong opinions of what we wanted, but how do you turn that into an applicable search, and, like, what's best practices? They've been superb with.
That's good. That's good. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about mandatory anti-racism training.
Sure.
Something you mentioned, I think, in your speech. So can you sort of just flesh out what that is, what you think is what it is, and then also what you think is important in that kind of
Sure.
training?
So, we have taken on as a district this mission of being explicitly anti-racist, which is to say that we aren't going to pretend that our schools and our society don't still have structural barriers and systematic inequities that make success harder for our students of color. And part of those biases, like anywhere else, are implicit, and I think it's fair to say very few people now, although more than I would have guessed 6 years ago, very few people want to be racist, but it's in the air. It's in the air we breathe. It's just the nature of society, reality of living in the society we live in.
So I'm sorry, how does that compare with 6 years ago?
I just said that 6 years ago I wouldn't have guessed as many people as we're seeing nationally do want.
Okay.
Like, I thought that almost all racism at this point was implicit. Sadly, I've been mistaken on that point. I've learned.
Okay.
But I still think most of it is just well-meaning people not realizing the degree to which, race, gender, class, all these issues still shape our assumptions and our biases. So, and I really, really want to appreciate, especially SEU's cooperation on this, coming together to be like, no, as part of our district, we're going to train everyone on best equity practices. This is something that's part of everyone's PD, right? Like, being anti-racist is everyone's job. And so, like, that is shaping how we do PD.
So PD is professional development,
yes,
right?
Apologies.
This is my job. I have to just make sure.
Yeah, thank you for catching it. So, like, and it played out in a number of ways. So, like, the day before students came back from winter break, there was a district-wide all-day training on restorative justice, right? Like, so it's really about thinking like through all of our systems and practices, how do we actually ensure in every way we touch students and families that we're doing so in a way that lowers barriers to success and challenges systemic inequities.
Okay, so I don't want to make you give a whole little workshop here,
I
but
probably couldn't. So
what
it's okay.
what is your definition of restorative justice? Now, isn't there a person in the schools who now is there someone who's a designated
So
leader in this?
yes, I'm probably a masochist, so I apologize in advance. But at its simplest, at its most universal, restorative justice is the idea that, like, you approach issues in the community, transgressions in the community, with a aim of healing the damage done, more so than trying to necessarily punish the damage doer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is both a simple switch, but an all-encompassing one. And yeah, I would not be qualified to give a seminar or workshop on it. But it's just basically this idea that we're here to, especially in a school, we're here to help students and young people be their best selves, which doesn't mean ignoring when there are transgressions, but it means approaching them from a position of how do we learn from this, how do we build from this, how do we heal from this.
Mm-hmm. I think I was reading some examples, and it was, so and so is not behaving, as opposed to why is so and so behaving the way they are, kind of thing.
How do we, if student X has an issue with student Y,
right? How
do we resolve it in such a way that both students are better off?
Right. Yeah. Well, none of this is easy.
No.
No. And none of it is even, my husband was looking at me, look at all these definitions, and, none of it's, you can't even necessarily get people to agree or whatever on
Which is why, again, I always give kudos and thanks to our staff at every level for being partners in this, because this is not something you can make people do.
Right.
These are not mind shifts we can force upon students or staff. This has to be a cooperative process. And so having the best students in the Commonwealth and the best staff in the Commonwealth all working together on this stuff is central.
Okay. We don't have tons of time left. I'm going to quickly ask you, you also mentioned in your midterm speech something about addressing issues of school assignment, and I wasn't quite sure what you were
Sure. So
talking
we haven't.
about.
So we haven't looked at our enrollment plans. We haven't looked at how it is that students get to schools they get to in 20 years. We know we need to build new buildings. So it's making sure that as we look at our enrollment projections, as we look at how we assign students, that we are creating a plan that is sustainable.
Yeah, there was something in the Globe the other day about if Boston has fewer children, the city should have fewer schools, was whatever that person's opinion was.
I don't think we have that problem. I think we assume that actually we're going to need more seats in the future. Right. How many more is one of the reasons we're doing an enrollment study. But where those seats should be in the city, how to make sure that everyone has equitable access to the schools of their desire. It could be that we need to revisit are we going to be a K-8 district? Are we going to have a school? I think there are a number of questions about structurally and in terms of best use of our spaces in our buildings. Because this is Somerville, right? Space is always going to be the issue. How we best use our space are the issues we're going to have to figure out in the next couple of years as we figure out our building plans.
Yeah. So, don't have a whole lot more time, but I'm going to quickly try to slip this in. So, the city is working on charter reform. There's someone from the school committee who's on that,
yes,
right?
Laura Pisone.
Yeah.
We also appointed two of the community members. Oh, well,
that's good. So, one of the suggestions in there is to lower the voting age from 18 to 16. And you had made a comment about school committee people are elected by people other than those that they serve, so to speak. So I was just wondering what you thought about
So,
lowering the voting age for local elections.
So I believe that, was it maybe 2 years ago? The school committee voted unanimously in support of lowering the voting age to 16. I certainly think it's the right thing to do. I would do it for all elections, but certainly for local ones. Yeah, I think it's absolutely the right thing to do.
Good. And then there was also a proposal to expand the vote to non-citizens. What's your thought on that?
I think reasonable people can disagree about a number of positions, but given the large number of immigrant families in a school system, it's only right that they should have a voice in how their schools are run. And my experience is these are people who want to be active in our community and want to be active in our society, and we should support that.
And doesn't it work, isn't it, so when you go to a school, you don't have to say, schools do not ask for.
We studiously do not ask.
Yeah, so what a person's status is, yeah.
The Supreme Court has ruled correctly that it's our obligation to educate everyone, and that is a job we take seriously. We bring us your tired, your huddle masses, you're going to be free. That's what we do.
So, getting to the end here, so are there open houses next month in February? Because I keep wanting to go and see the inside of the high school.
So I know that they've been open houses this month and last month. I know that, yes, there is a plan. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I apologize. I can get back to you on that. But there's absolutely been our plans to let the public finally see this gorgeous space.
The cafeteria you can see from the outside, that is amazing. It used to be in the basement and
dank, and
the ceiling was low and no light.
Yeah,
and,
no.
Yeah.
The high school is an amazing space. It's the space our students deserve. But yes, there's definitely plans in the spring to finally get the public in to see this beautiful space.
Okay. Okay, so this has been School Committee Update. Have a nice day.